When I first met my teacher, his name is Guru Prem, I said, okay, Guru Prem, how am I going to die? And he said, you're going to die on an exhale. That's the last thing you're going to do. That'll be your last act, that final breath. That's how you're going to die, like everybody else. He said, you came in on an inhale, just like everybody else. And that's our life. On that exhale, we let go of what we no longer need. We let go of what no longer serves us. Equally importantly, the exhale allows us to do something that is perhaps the most valuable or impactful or powerful thing that we have, and that is carrying my words. So my teacher, in the expanded perspective on that first thing he said to me, he said, be mindful of your exhale. Be really mindful of the words that come out of your mouth. Welcome, Steph.
Thank you. And thank you for having me in the circle today. It's such an honor. You have no idea. Really means the world.
I'm so glad to hear that. And I assure you the honor is mine as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, my husband and I, my late husband and I, found out about you and the work you were doing, I think over 10 years ago. And we respect your work. And currently, I've listened to nearly every podcast. I can't wait for them to come out. And as someone who doesn't necessarily struggle from drug and alcohol addiction, I find the podcast to be super valuable. And I just love it. I learn something every time. And so in March and April of 2022, my husband wrote a book about his life in addiction to try and help other people learn more about the mind of an addict or what they go through. And it's called Dear Addict. And in August of that same year, he passed away. And shortly after writing the book. And because he wrote the book, I've been very open about the way that he passed. And so often people will find out that I've lost my husband. And they'll say, oh my gosh, you lost your husband? How did he die? And I say, sometimes I don't say, but most of the time I say he had a substance use disorder. He suffered from addiction. And then they go, oh, and they don't really know what to say. But it feels like to me that his loss is less important or somewhat more insignificant because it was a complicated death. And I think if he didn't have the book coming out, I don't know how I would look at this or how I would respond. But I'm pretty brave in how I respond, and I stand in the truth of that because it's important. And I want to kind of normalize talking about addiction so that there's less secrets and people can get the help that they need. So my question is not only how do I answer this question, because, we're going on a year and a half now, but also how do I respond to what I feel is a dismissal by some people, not all, and also the judgment that comes from that, because I know people may not understand why I stayed. But I know why I stayed. And so anyway, that is my question. And I think it's a valuable question that a lot of people may.
Thank you so much, Steph, for sharing so honestly and so vulnerably. It always benefits everybody, always, to show up in this way. So let's explore a little bit. Okay. When I first met my teacher, one of the very first things he said to me was, I know how you're going to die. And he caught my attention. That's not a normal thing for someone to say to someone, especially when they've just met them. His name is Guru Prem. I said, okay, Guru Prem, how am I going to die? And he said, you're going to die on an exhale. On an exhale. That's the last thing you're going to do. That'll be your last act. That final breath. That's how you're going to die, like everybody else. He said you came in on an inhale, just like everybody else. And that's our life. Now, from the yogic perspective, the exhale is emphasized. There's a spotlight, if you will, on the exhale. The exhale has a few very important functions. We all are familiar with the basic functions of the exhale: to release carbon dioxide and other waste products. On that exhale, we let go of what we no longer need. We let go of what no longer serves us. In a more, if you will, in a more energetic, spiritual perspective on the exhale, when we exhale, and we really exhale well, we let go. And we release the things that no longer can serve us in our life. Perhaps even more, well, equally importantly, the exhale allows us to do something that is perhaps the most valuable or impactful or powerful thing that we have. And of course, I'm doing it right now. And I wouldn't be able to do it if I didn't have an exhale. And that is carrying my words. The exhale carries your words. So my teacher, in the expanded perspective on that first thing he said to me, he said, be mindful of your exhale, always. What he meant by that was, and the most basic of physical necessity of the exhale and the physical purpose, really exhale. Really let go of carbon dioxide. Really have that exhale so you can take a full inhale next. Beyond that, really let go of what you no longer need. Beyond that, be really mindful of the words that come out of your mouth. So when the yogis say, be mindful of your exhale, or sometimes I've heard it said, be kind on your exhale, or have a kind exhale. That's a reference to these words which are so powerful, which get carried on the exhale. Now, to take this further into the metaphoric realm, which will be directly in relation to your inquiry, the exhale can be thought of as the final thing that we do in life. The thing that had to be done before we were done. The way that we exhaled, our exhale is representative of our contribution to the world. And so I just want to begin here because your husband's exhale, among other things that I'm unaware of, was that book. That's what he had to do. Had to do it. It was a calling for him. And so that's a valuable, powerful, meaningful, extraordinary life that he lived. To have that final exhale where his thought was, there's something I have to express. I feel that this could be helpful to others. It's not diminished in any way by the fact that he struggled in these same ways that he was writing about. I'm really curious about this book. I'm going to have to look at it. I'm going to have to look it up and see what he had to say, because this was his final mission, along with all the things that I don't know related to you, all the other people that loved him, all the other people that he impacted in his life in some way, all the other relationships, everything, the totality of a human being's life. So as we explore, how do we answer the question when somebody asks us, oh, how did he die? With tremendous purpose. With a big, powerful exhale. That's how he died. He died a lover of people and a lover of life. Why do people get caught in addiction of any form? Why do people lose their lives to addiction in any form? Because the addiction is so alluring, it presents a possibility of a life beyond the perceived or very real, intolerable present moment for that person. And it hooks us. And there's nobody that I've ever met in human form that is bigger than this thing. There are many people who, if they listen to this podcast, they would say, well, I just don't understand. How could you be so invested in helping other people and then succumb to the very thing that you want to help them with? So many people won't understand. And there's no need to explain. There's no need to explain. And why you stayed? I know why you stayed. Out of love. You stayed because you loved him. And you know what? You did the right thing. And it couldn't have been any other way. Because you too, I can see it in your face right now. You are a lover of life and a lover of people, and you are not here to not love. You're here to love. So often in our community of recovery, our community meaning the greater community of recovery, people, we bandy about the term of codependency. And I'm the first to admit codependency is a real struggle for people. And there's a shadow side to it, but there's also a light side to it. What do we know about codependent people? They really, really care. They really, really conscious and aware people and very considerate. There's a balance issue there that gets onto the dark side of it. And I just raised my hand as someone that in my life, I have to look at that. In my own relationships, in my core relationship with my wife and everybody that I know, all my colleagues, the people I work with, my beloved friends and family and teachers and everybody. I have to check my behavior all the time because I know what I'm vulnerable to. But I just bring all that up to say, let's not forget about the bright side of being that loving and that caring. That's part of what we know about people who tend toward codependency, meaning those who might get caught on the shadow side of that trait. But there's also a beautiful side as well. There's a tremendous disconnect in our country, in the world, really, when we speak about what addiction really is. First of all, most people think addiction is limited to the concept of drugs and alcohol. Most people still. Yeah, we understand there are other addictions, but really, are those really addictions? I don't know. But trust me when I say they are. They can be. Food, sex, relationships, money, gambling, shopping, hoarding, being constantly in a state of debt, technology. Come on. How can we not see these things as addictions? the deeper misunderstanding is people. It's ironic. People in recovery are trained to think of themselves as separate. Do you realize that? People in recovery are trained to believe, oh, I'm different than other people. And the reason they're trained to believe that is because the original text, the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous in 1939, says so, that we are different than our fellows. And that's really not true, except with regard to maybe one thing, maybe, which is just a behavioral thing, a training that we've developed around a substance like alcohol, where alcohol behaves differently in our bodies after a certain while than other people's bodies. But we're not different from our brothers and sisters. On the spiritual level, we are really not different. And all of us have our unique characteristics, our unique genealogy and epigenealogy and all this. Our family histories, our memories, all this. Sure, we have these unique experiences. But we're not separate from. So the irony is that people who desperately need to be a part of are cast as separate. The further irony is that society also thinks these people are separate. And by the way, wants them to be. I don't want to be near that. I don't want to be near those people. I don't understand it. It looks ugly. It's the worst of human behavior. Oh my God, that person, how could they be behaving this way? Oh my God. And so we want to push that away. Society wants to push that away any way that it can. Now, it's such a complex issue. And it varies from one person to the next. There's not one way that a person behaves when they're an addict in some form or another. But the depth of misunderstanding of what it is, how to heal from it, can you heal from it, what's possible. I'm thinking right now of an extreme example of addiction that people in our society have to deal with, which is, for example, the person who has just overdosed and who shows up at an emergency room. And the nurses and the doctors in the emergency room are doing everything they can to save this person's life. And when they do save that person's life, very, very often they are met with anger and they're met with rage and they're met with mental illness of every kind. And it's not like the person whose life they just saved is like, oh, thank you for saving my life. I love you so much. This is the most one. No, it's ugly. It's ugly. So I understand people not wanting to deal with people when they're in that kind of shape. And yet, that's just a human being who's very, very sick. They're sick in their addiction. And there's a path for that. And that path needs to be, I've said it many times, it needs to be more readily available for more people than it currently is. So it's complex, and I'm finding that our society really still doesn't understand what addiction is. We want to look at it purely as a disease. When we start looking at something as a disease, it makes a person perhaps permanently sick. There's not room for the possibility of recovery. There's not a real exploration of the idea of recovery, as evidenced by the fact that our medical community believes that addiction is a lifelong disease. You never get over it. It's characterized by relapse. And this is what basically came out in the Surgeon General's report in 2017. I agree with a lot of what's in that report, but I don't agree with the disease model of addiction because I find it disempowering. And I also find that it gives the pharmaceutical companies a real opportunity to start to try to treat addiction with medicine, pharmacological solutions, which have a relevance at certain periods of time for short periods of time, but in more cases than not are not a wise strategy for treating addiction. So you have all of this going on, all of this misunderstanding, and you come to somebody on a personal level and you say, yes, I lost my husband. And of course they're like curious. Okay, how did that happen? And you say, oh, well, he had substance use disorder. It's confusing at best to most people. It's confusing. Even the term substance use disorder it's a relatively new term. Last 5 to 10 years that term has come up because it was sort of put forth as a way of reducing stigma and the misunderstanding that we're speaking about right now. That if we explain to people that they have a substance use disorder, it's a kinder way of explaining the situation than to simply call them an addict, or even worse, a junkie, or an alcoholic, and these kinds of things, because those words historically had these incredibly negative and misunderstood meanings. And so I think the hope was this is a rebranding. We're going to rebrand the problem as substance use disorder, and hopefully that brand brings about more understanding and more compassion. And I certainly hope for that. It doesn't make sense to me. I actually don't understand the term. Even that's me. I'm working in the field for 30 years. But I do hope that it, in some way, shape, or form, as it becomes more a part of the vocabulary, that it eases people's suffering and allows people to connect with each other around this issue. Finally, we're in a time now where so many hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people are dying from addiction. Drug addiction, alcoholism, but other things too. People die from all forms of addiction. And so there's hardly anyone alive today that hasn't been affected by this thing in one way, shape, or form. Either they themselves have struggled with addiction like I have in so many different ways, or they're a loved one of someone else that they've seen suffer. So it's so ubiquitous that for you to say to someone, my husband died from substance use disorder, it's one thing to say, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But I don't think it will bring about a conversation, and I don't think it will bring about an understanding. And it's a very complex and difficult thing. And here we're speaking about the power of words. What are the right words here? I don't know any of the details of your husband's death, so I'm not speaking specifically. I look at some people that I know who have been close to me who have died of cancer. And someone will say, how did they die? They want to know, what did it? What did it? What was this? Because there's a real desire to have a specific, we always want a diagnosis or an explanation, like what happened? How did this happen? Because it's so frightening a topic for us. But I see a lot of people who have died from cancer, and I would not say that, they died from cancer, but I wouldn't say that's how they died. I might say more accurately, if we were going to have a real conversation, I would say, oh, well, this person died from bitterness. This person died from a broken heart. Sometimes I see people in long-term recovery, 5 years, 10 years sober, not using drugs and alcohol anymore. And they have a very, very painful relationship or divorce or breakup. And it's so painful for them, they have a broken heart from it. And some of those people end up relapsing on drugs and alcohol from the pain of that experience of codependency. The shadow side that we spoke about earlier. And then people will look and say, oh, they died of alcoholism. They died of drug addiction. No, that's not what happened at all. That was just the vehicle that took them out of their body. No, they died of a broken heart. They died of a misunderstanding. They died of an identity crisis. They died of traumatic circumstances that they were unable to move past. And we're all vulnerable to it. And the word trauma is such a big word right now in our society. And, there's a lot of it going around. So there's infinite ways of answering that question. And you also don't have to answer that question. How did he die? He died on an exhale. That'll sort of that'll change the focus of that conversation, because someone's gonna say, I need to understand what you mean by that, and you can explain it to them. So you see, really what you're speaking about is the divide in understanding between people who have had an experience with addiction and people who haven't, or people who don't understand what it is. And there's a group of people in the world, I think the majority still, but not for very long, much longer. They're in the majority still, this group of people who think that they don't have any addictive tendencies within them. And that's a misunderstanding of the human condition. This human condition begins with purity, pure light, pure awareness, pure consciousness. We come into this body and we start to accumulate ideas, traumas, memories, misconceptions, perceptions, misunderstandings, understandings, knowledge, delusion. We start to meet people. We get influenced by other ideas, other people's opinions. So this is part of the human condition. And to the extent that we still believe that we are our thinking, or we are our thoughts, or that we are our emotions, that's an identity crisis. That's an addiction that we all share until we don't. The meditative process, the process of recovery from addiction, the process of yoga moves us to a place where we're no longer thinking that we are our thoughts. We're no longer thinking that we are our emotions. We experience those things in this body and this mind, but that's not ultimately who we are or what we are. And when we move back to that place, we are no longer, when we move back to the place of connectedness to our true self, we are no longer in addiction of any kind. I wish I could have met your husband. I'm sure he was probably just like me in so many ways, and I'm so sorry that he's gone in physical form, but clearly not gone. And he left behind him something very special with his last exhale, which is that book, and I hope that it gets to see the light of day. So these are some of my reflections. I want to ask what comes up for you, Steph, as you hear me reflecting on these things.
Wow. Well, I really appreciate that. I feel like I kind of took a breath out. I've been holding this in as helpfully as I can, but I feel like a weight has been released. And yes, and I think it's so beautiful that you put he had tremendous purpose, because he did feel like his whole life was leading up to this moment of writing his story. And he had many false starts. He had 2 overdoses prior to this. He was sober when he wrote the book. And I think spilling everything that he'd held inside out onto this paper, he didn't have the support system. And I think any kind of judgment hurt him, and not from me. I was very happy about the book, very supportive. But I think that's what led to his relapse and his accidental mixed drug intoxication. Anyway, but I do like that you said he died with a big, powerful exhale, because this book is a gift. He left something on this earth to share with others, and his legacy will live on. I'm getting ready to publish it next month. He did have a quote in there, and he wanted to meet you so bad for years, but we just didn't have the financial means to do it. But he died. I like how you said he died a lover of people. He loved people so much. We talk about how deep he was. And so I can just move forward into that space of thinking of his final exhale being powerful and beautiful and loving. And that he did die from heartache and trauma and pain. He held it in his body. I know you had back problems, so did he. And we tried to find solutions. That's how I found you. Anyway, and so I do appreciate hearing that from you. You know, like I wrote, died of a broken heart. And it was a traumatic conclusion. But I also know that he's free, and he left his message on the earth for other people to learn from him. I'm so
sorry that we didn't get to meet. And I hope that you and I get to meet at some point. And if that's of interest to you to come with us anywhere we go, please make a point of reaching out to me. And I'm sincere. Please make a point of reaching out to me, and we will make that happen for sure.
That's so kind.
Oh my goodness. And the last thing that you said made me think about something that I just want to invoke here. There is a mystery that none of us can grasp about this life and beyond this life. This mystery is, I like to say, there's a plan. There's always a plan. There's always a plan. We're so limited in what we can access with these bodies and these nervous systems, and we can only see what we can see, only divine what we can divine. But our effort is to connect to tap into a greater well of wisdom and consciousness, which is possible for everybody. This mystery has a plan to it. And we don't get to see the plan or necessarily understand the plan, but in what you've described and what I've heard many other people describe about losing somebody who had a purpose and needed to do something, on the spiritual plane, I believe they completed their work. In the physical plane, mental, emotional plane, they struggled or suffered in the way that they did, as have I, as have so many. And yet the effort remains, the calling to do the thing that he did as his final exhale was, I just very clear, this is a spiritual, deep calling. It had to happen. And it had to happen despite his physical, emotional, and mental suffering. And somehow he made it through all of that to do this.